The House has voted on the bill to force the Justice Department to release those files, the files involving the government's investigation into convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Now, there was one no vote. It still needs to get through the Senate. Leader John Thune has been non-committal about bringing it up for a vote. The president says if it reaches his desk, he would sign it. A lot of critics say the president doesn't need congressional approval. You could just request the Justice Department to release the files right now. President Trump strongly opposed the plan for months until he reversed course Sunday. Last week, the president asked the Justice Department to investigate any ties between Epstein and powerful Democrats, including former President Bill Clinton, who has denied any wrongdoing. One of those Democrats is Harvard professor and former Treasury Secretary under Clinton, Larry Summers. He says he is stepping back from public life after messages between him and Epstein were released. He says he is deeply ashamed of his actions and recognizes the pain they have caused. CBS News congressional reporter Taurean Small joins us from Capitol Hill. Taurean, what happened with the vote?
Yeah, Lindsay, we saw 427 to 1. That is a pretty resounding vote in the affirmative for this bill. Near unanimous. The one lawmaker defector in this is Clay Higgins, a Republican from Louisiana, who's also part of the Freedom Caucus. We're working to get his statement on why he voted against this. But ultimately, though, this is exactly what many, including quite a few Republicans, expected to happen. Even House Speaker Mike Johnson suggested that this would be well on its way to the Senate, even though he had some reservations about the bill as it stands, one of which is privacy for some of the victims named in these files, as they're set to be released in a very public manner in a searchable and downloadable format as per the rules of this law. It now heads over to the Senate, where Leader Thune is likely to consider amendments, considering he had a conversation with Speaker Johnson about this before it heads to the floor. If that happens and it passes out of the Senate with those changes, it would have to come back to the House for a vote before it makes it to the president's desk. One other thing, Lindsay, I want to bring up is what Representative Thomas Massie, the Republican who kind of led the charge on this, brought up. He took issue and had pause when President Trump made that very notable pivot. When President Trump said that he's also looking to investigate Democrats connected to Epstein, Massie thought that could be a ploy to potentially thwart the full release of these files, saying that a provision in the law under an active investigation could prohibit the Department of Justice from releasing these files. We'll have to see what happens next, but that is what we're watching as this moves forward.
And while we've been talking just a few minutes ago, Representative Clay Higgins did post on X saying he has been a principled no on this bill from the beginning. He was saying what was wrong with the bill 3 months ago is still wrong today. He says if enacted in its current form, this type of broad reveal of criminal investigative files released to a rabid media will absolutely result in innocent people being hurt. So that aside, what does this passing mean for those survivors who spoke earlier on the steps on Capitol Hill?
It's what they've been advocating for, Lindsay. They said, get the politics out of this. They just want to see justice in the form of transparency. That's also what Marjorie Taylor Greene, another notable Republican who, because of this, essentially has caused a pretty public falling out with President Trump. She says she's been the target of death threats because she's been such a vocal advocate for this bill when Donald Trump was not. So it's caused, in her mind, a massive rift to the party. But ultimately, though, she says this is for the benefit of survivors of Jeffrey Epstein. She and other Republicans who have been pretty supportive has says this has nothing to do with Donald Trump in their minds. This is just about seeking justice for the victims of the convicted sex offender, Lindsay.
Walk us through some of how we got here, specifically as it pertains to the rift that it has caused within the Republican Party, with some former staunch allies, fervent supporters of President Trump, breaking with him and now finding themselves on the other side of his ire.
Yeah, President Trump has maintained that this is a hoax perpetuated by Democrats, which is why he had quite a bit of backlash against any Republican who essentially endorsed that discharge petition going forth. This was also came as House Speaker Mike Johnson said that he didn't want to take up any legislation around this. He said that the House Oversight Committee was working its own investigation and actively releasing all documents that it received from the Epstein estate. However, that just didn't sit well with other Republicans like Thomas Massie, for example, who said that this isn't the transparency that not just the Trump administration, but the Republican leadership team promised, which is why they moved forward with this. Ultimately, though, as it crosses the finish line, we have to question what's next when it comes to President Trump. If that investigation will impede the full release of this, as Thomas Massie has laid out, and then whether or not Leader Thune will take it up and consider those changes that he talked about with Speaker Johnson, or if he'll heed the advice of other members of the Senate, particularly Democrats like Chuck Schumer, and just push this through immediately and send this to the president's desk.
So the vote passed the Epstein Files Transparency Act 427 to 1. We've been discussing how the representative from Louisiana, Clay Higgins, was the lone no vote. Are we expecting, if these files do end up getting released, that they will be heavily redacted?
Potentially. I mean, that would be what the amendments are calling for if the Senate were to take it up and make those changes. But we'll see what the DOJ says. If there is litigation or anything within their legal means they could do to prevent this from moving forward. But also, we have to look at the optics here. Democrats, since Trump took office, has framed this debate as the Trump administration, as the Republican Party looking to cover up or protect. Republicans, however, has the burden of running on this in 2024, saying that their rise to power, their majority, and winning the White House would give them the opportunity to release this. There was a very public display when Trump took office of conservative influencers being invited to the White House to receive what they called the Epstein files. That certainly wasn't this, but the Trump administration has made an effort in the past to at least show that they're willing to divulge information. It's curious as to why there was so much pushback on this, considering there isn't an active investigation, or there wasn't up to this point, why the president was so against this. But as we saw, both sides ultimately deciding in this vote to send this across the aisle and to send this to the president's desk, at least the first step of that happening today, Lindsay.
Taurean Small, thank you.